There's a moment in every Sigma male's life when he looks around and realizes he's not surrounded by enemies, but he's also no longer surrounded by equals. The conversations feel shallow, the energy feels off, and the connections that once felt essential now feel exhausting. It's not that he's better than anyone. It's that he's evolving faster, deeper, and quieter than most people ever will. And evolution always comes with distance. The Sigma male doesn't outgrow people because he stops caring. He outgrows them because they stop growing. He's no longer drawn to drama, small talk, or empty validation. His standards shift from connection to alignment. And that shift costs him comfort, but gives him clarity. What used to feel like loneliness becomes power. The power to walk alone without losing momentum. This video explores why the Sigma male eventually outgrows almost everyone he knows. Not from arrogance, but from awakening. Because when your mind sharpens and your energy matures, very few people can meet you where you are without trying to pull you back to where they're stuck. Subscribe to Ultrawise for more deep insights into the Sigma evolution, the psychology, the silence, and the power behind walking your own path. In the comments, do you feel like you've been quietly drifting away from people lately? Or are you still trying to hold on to connections that no longer fit the person you're becoming? When familiar energy starts feeling foreign, it happens quietly, not through conflict, but through clarity. One day, the Sigma male walks into the same room he's always been in, surrounded by the same people he's always known, but something feels off. The conversations that once felt natural now sound mechanical. The jokes don't land. The energy that used to feel like home suddenly feels heavy, outdated, like he's outgrown an invisible skin. It's not arrogance, it's awareness. He's no longer the same person who once needed their approval or shared their pace. The air feels different because he is different. Growth changes his frequency. What used to stimulate him, gossip, distraction, validation, now drains him. He starts noticing the subtleties. How often people talk but never say anything. How they repeat the same cycles but call it comfort. He realizes most people aren't really living. They're recycling patterns. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. It's like realizing the background noise you tolerated your whole life is actually deafening. He doesn't blame them. In fact, he feels compassion because he knows he used to be the same, searching for meaning in sameness, calling stagnation stability. But the Sigma male's mind doesn't tolerate repetition for long. He thrives on evolution, on truth, on pushing beyond what's easy. So when the energy around him no longer matches that growth, he doesn't rebel. He simply withdraws, not out of resentment, but self-preservation. And that's when loneliness tries to creep in, but this time it doesn't win. Because he begins to understand that feeling disconnected is actually the first sign of alignment. Familiar energy feels foreign because he's entering a new chapter, one that no longer fits inside old conversations or temporary friendships. So he stops forcing connection. He lets people drift. And he doesn't chase. The silence that once terrified him now feels sacred. He learns to love his own company, to listen to his inner rhythm instead of the world's noise. And soon the people he's meant to meet, those who vibrate at the same depth, start appearing naturally. Because when familiar energy starts feeling foreign, it's not a loss, it's evolution. It's the universe's way of whispering, you've outgrown your old circle. Keep walking. The disillusionment with surface-level thinking. There comes a point when the Sigma male's mind simply stops being satisfied by the shallow, when conversations about trends, gossip, or status start to sound like static. It's not that he's trying to be distant, it's that surface-level thinking can't breathe in the depth he's reached. He's tasted silence, reflection, solitude, and once a man experiences that kind of internal richness, He can't go back to noise that offers no meaning. What once felt entertaining now feels exhausting. He listens as people talk in circles about things that don't matter, and he feels himself fading out. Not because he's rude, but because his mind is already miles away, searching for something real. This disillusionment doesn't happen suddenly. It builds slowly, through disappointment and observation. He notices how easily people form opinions without knowledge, how quickly they judge what they've never experienced, and how afraid they are of thinking for themselves. The Sigma male starts realizing that most people don't think. They repeat. They recycle society's ideas, imitate emotions, and call it depth. But he can't play along anymore. Every time he tries, it feels like he's betraying his own mind. So he grows quieter, not out of superiority, but peace. The less he engages in shallow discussions, the more mental energy he saves for things that actually move him. Books, philosophy, self-mastery, purpose. That's where he finds fulfillment now. He no longer seeks stimulation, he seeks substance. And as he does, the gap between him and the average person widens. It's not a separation built on pride, it's built on awareness. The world doesn't reward deep thinkers. It misunderstands them. People will say he's cold, distant, or disconnected. But in truth, he's simply choosing quality over quantity. Truth over validation. He no longer needs to argue, prove, or correct. He's seen enough to know that real wisdom doesn't shout, it observes. The Sigma male's disillusionment isn't a downfall, it's his evolution. It's what happens when the mind matures beyond the illusion of connection built on noise. And once he steps into that clarity, there's no going back. Because when you start craving conversations that expand you, surface-level thinking stops feeling like community and starts feeling like starvation. Growth that demands solitude? For most people, growth means adding more connections, more experiences, more noise. But for the Sigma male, true growth comes from subtraction. It's the shedding of everything that once distracted him from himself. People, habits, expectations. He learns that solitude isn't punishment, it's preparation. The kind of growth he's chasing can't happen in a crowd. It requires silence sharp enough to expose truth and distance deep enough to hear his own thoughts again. At first, solitude feels uncomfortable. The absence of constant interaction exposes parts of himself he used to hide behind activity. Insecurities, regrets, unprocessed pain. But instead of running from it, he sits with it, because he knows that what he faces, he can't transform. Slowly, he begins to see solitude not as loneliness, but as a mirror. One that reflects who he really is beneath all the roles he used to play. During this stage, he becomes invisible to the world. Friends drift, social circles fade, and people begin to misunderstand his quiet withdrawal. But what they don't see is that he's building something powerful in the background. Inner structure. He's refining his discipline, aligning his values, and separating emotion from impulse. He's becoming grounded in ways that can't be measured publicly, but are felt deeply internally. The paradox of this phase is that while he appears detached, he's actually reconnecting, not with others but with purpose. Solitude gives him space to remember what matters and clarity to release what doesn't. He learns that growth isn't always loud or glamorous. Sometimes it's the stillness between major transformations, the quiet before a new version of himself steps forward. The Sigma male doesn't isolate because he hates people. He isolates because he refuses to lose himself in them. His silence isn't escape, it's evolution. Every hour spent alone adds another layer of independence, insight, and self-command. And eventually, that solitude that once felt heavy becomes his sanctuary, the place where he grows stronger, sharper, and more centered than ever before. Because the truth is simple, not all growth happens in company. The deepest kind, the kind that makes a man unshakable, happens when he faces the world alone and realizes he doesn't need it to define him. The collapse of conditional friendships. The Sigma male eventually reaches a point where every superficial bond begins to crumble under the weight of his authenticity. He starts to notice how many of his connections were built on convenience, not connection, on familiarity, not loyalty. The truth hits hard. Most friendships were never unconditional. They were held together by roles, benefits, or unspoken expectations. The moment he stops playing his part, the listener, the helper, the reliable one, people start disappearing, and that's when it clicks. What he thought was loyalty was often dependency, and what he thought was care was often control. At first, this realization feels like betrayal. He questions himself, wondering if he became too cold, too distant, too difficult to relate to. But the more he observes, the clearer it becomes. These friendships weren't collapsing because he changed for the worse. They're collapsing because he's no longer feeding them with self-sacrifice. The Sigma male stops overextending, stops proving his worth, and suddenly the people who only stayed when it was convenient revealed their true colors through silence. This collapse, though painful, becomes liberating. It clears the space he once filled with one-sided loyalty. The emotional weight of pretending lifts. He no longer feels the need to explain his absence or apologize for his boundaries. In the quiet aftermath, he begins to attract something new. Rare, genuine connections that don't require him to shrink or compromise. The Sigma male learns that real friendship doesn't demand conformity. It respects evolution. He stops looking for people who understand his past self and starts aligning with those who respect his present growth. Because anyone who only values you when you're convenient doesn't deserve you when you become free. The collapse of conditional friendships marks a turning point, the death of superficial connection and the birth of selective loyalty. It's not loneliness that follows, but clarity. He realizes that his peace was never meant to be shared with everyone, only with those who earned it. So when people fall away, he doesn't chase. He thanks them silently for revealing who they truly were. Because once you see how fragile conditional love is, you stop mourning what ended and start protecting what's real. The emotional price of self-discovery. Self-discovery sounds beautiful, poetic even, but for the Sigma male, it's not a romantic journey. It's a reckoning. It's nights of silence so deep that every suppressed thought echoes back louder than ever. It's the uncomfortable realization that becoming self-awareness means losing the illusions that once made life easier. He learns quickly that the truth doesn't set you free right away. It breaks you first, because before you can rebuild yourself, you have to admit how much of who you were was built to survive, not to live. He begins to see how many of his beliefs were borrowed from family, from culture, from people who never understood him. The roles he played, the calm one, the reliable one, the strong one, were never choices. They were defenses. And tearing them down doesn't feel liberating. It feels terrifying. Self-discovery demands the kind of honesty that strips away everything fake, including the version of himself that once fit in. There are days when the loneliness feels heavier than peace, when he wonders if awareness is a blessing or a curse. But even in that discomfort, something profound begins to shift. He starts making decisions not from fear, but from alignment. He stops saying yes to preserve connection and starts saying no to protect his energy. And though that shift costs him people, comfort, and predictability, it gives him something greater: authenticity. This emotional price isn't temporary. It lingers in the distance between him and the world that no longer understands his silence, in the way he watches life differently now, like someone who's seen behind the curtain. But instead of hardening him, it hones him. The pain becomes discipline. The solitude becomes clarity. The heartbreak becomes direction. The Sigma male learns that every version of himself that had to die was never the real one, just the one afraid to be seen. And through that loss, he gains something no crowd could ever give: inner peace that can't be manipulated. Because the emotional price of self-discovery is steep. It costs you illusions, comfort, and sometimes love. But what you gain is priceless. The quiet strength of a man who finally knows exactly who he is and no longer needs anyone else to confirm it. Evolving beyond validation-based bonds. There comes a point in the Sigma male's evolution where validation stops working, where every "I'm proud of you," every compliment, every pat on the back feels strangely empty. For years, those words fueled him. They were the quiet proof that he mattered, that his efforts were seen. But the more he grows, the more he realizes that most relationships are built not on truth, but on exchange. I validate you, you validate me. It's an unspoken contract, fragile, conditional, and easily broken. And once he sees that, he can never unsee it. He starts recognizing how many people confuse attention with connection, how often they only give when they expect something back: approval, access, or emotional control. And suddenly, every bond that once felt stable begins to feel transactional. The Sigma male no longer wants to be liked, he wants to be real. But the moment he stops feeding other people's egos, their energy shifts. The praise turns into distance, the warmth fades into indifference. And that's when he learns the hardest truth of all. Most people don't love you. They love the way you make them feel. This realization doesn't make him bitter, it makes him free. He begins to detach from relationships that thrive on reassurance and manipulation. He stops explaining his choices to people who only listen to respond. His silence becomes his filter. And through that silence, he starts meeting people who don't need to constantly prove their loyalty. They just embody it. The beauty of evolving beyond validation-based bonds is that it shifts his entire sense of belonging. He's no longer addicted to being understood. He doesn't chase attention because peace has replaced performance. His energy becomes rarer, and so does his circle. Now, he connects only with those who see beyond surface, people who respect boundaries as much as they value honesty. And as his need for validation dissolves, something powerful happens. His relationships stop being emotional negotiations and start being spiritual alignments. He no longer asks, "Do they like me?" but "Do they see me?" And when that becomes the standard, few remain, but those who do are real. Because when a Sigma male evolves beyond validation, he stops being available to the world's noise and becomes magnetic to what's genuine. Peace becomes the new connection filter. There comes a stage in the Sigma male's evolution where his most valuable metric for connection isn't chemistry, loyalty, or history. It's peace. He's lived through enough emotional storms, manipulative games, and shallow relationships to know that peace isn't boring. It's rare. What once drew him in, intensity, unpredictability, passion, now repels him. He's no longer impressed by excitement that costs him clarity. And he starts measuring people not by how much they entertain him, but by how calm he feels in their presence. At first, this shift feels strange. The people he used to connect with begin to feel loud, not in volume but in energy. Every interaction feels like static, every conversation like a tug of war for attention. So he starts stepping back. He stops chasing connection and begins observing. He notices that peaceful people don't need to prove themselves. They don't drain his energy, and they don't compete with his silence. They match it. And for the first time, connection feels like stillness, not stimulation. This is where everything changes. He stops mistaking chaos for passion and drama for depth. He no longer feels guilty for walking away from people who constantly bring tension, confusion, or emotional instability, because now he understands peace is the highest form of compatibility. It's not the absence of conversation, but the presence of ease. The Sigma male begins to curate his circle like he curates his mind, carefully, intentionally, quietly. The fewer people he entertains, the clearer his thoughts become. His world gets smaller, but his peace expands. He realizes that alignment isn't about who shares his interests, but who doesn't disturb his equilibrium. People often call this detachment, but it's actually maturity. He's learned that not everyone deserves emotional access. Some people bring noise when you need silence. Others bring ego when you need balance. So he keeps his connections few but meaningful. People who add peace, not pressure. And that's the paradox. When peace becomes your filter, your world shrinks, but your power grows. Because once you experience a connection that brings calm instead of chaos, you stop settling for anything that shakes your soul. The quiet acceptance of being misunderstood. At some point, every Sigma male reaches a stage where he stops explaining himself, not out of pride, but out of peace. He realizes that no matter how carefully he speaks, most people only hear him through the filter of their own limitations. They don't listen to understand, they listen to confirm what they already believe. And so, instead of wasting energy trying to prove his intentions, he simply allows himself to be misunderstood. It's not resignation, it's liberation. Because once you stop needing to be understood, you become impossible to be controlled. In the past, he used to over-explain, softening his edges, clarifying his silence, defending his solitude. Every time someone called him distant or cold, he tried to correct the perception, but each attempt only drained him more. He began to realize that explanations are emotional negotiations, and he no longer negotiates with misunderstanding. So, he learns the art of quiet acceptance. He lets people assume what they want, and he keeps walking. This shift is subtle, but it changes everything. His energy stops leaking into arguments and validation loops. He becomes grounded, calm, unbothered. He doesn't chase being liked. He focuses on being aligned. Because the Sigma male finally understands that the ones meant to understand him won't need explanations, and the ones demanding them will never truly listen anyway. At first, this detachment confuses others. They think he's given up or grown cold, but the truth is, he's just outgrown the need for approval. He's learned that peace is found in silence, in letting misunderstandings fade instead of feeding them. The noise of others' opinions no longer stings. It just sounds distant. He's not running from misunderstanding. He's walking toward self-mastery. And in that quiet acceptance, he finds a deeper kind of freedom. The kind that comes from knowing that authenticity doesn't need to be explained, only lived. He'd rather be misunderstood for his truth than celebrated for a version of himself that isn't real. That's when his silence becomes his loudest statement, not of indifference, but of power. Because once a Sigma male accepts that not everyone will understand him, he stops trying to fit in and starts standing above everything that once tried to define him. Outgrowing people isn't arrogance, it's alignment. The Sigma male doesn't walk away because he's cold or superior. He walks away because his soul refuses to stay small in spaces that no longer challenge or nourish him. Growth demands distance, and peace demands pruning. What once felt like loss eventually reveals itself as evolution. If you've ever felt that quiet pull, that urge to move forward even when it means walking alone, you're not broken. You're becoming. You're shedding versions of yourself that once survived but can't thrive where you're going. Remember this: real growth doesn't seek permission, and real purpose never fits in shallow places. Subscribe to Ultrawise for more deep psychological and emotional insights into the Sigma mindset, where solitude becomes strength, silence becomes strategy, and authenticity becomes your power. And tell me in the comments, do you feel like you've started outgrowing the people around you, or are you still trying to hold on to connections that no longer match your peace?